If you would like to listen to or download any or all of Power at Work's blogcasts in podcast form, they are available for streaming and download on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. Just search Power at Work on any podcast platform and enjoy all of Power at Work's podcasts. While you're there, two things we would like you to do. First, subscribe, and that way you won't miss any Power at Work podcasts. Second, please give Power at Work a 5-star rating, a like, a love, whatever is the tool that your podcast provider gives you. It helps others who care about workers and worker power to find Power at Work's content. They will be grateful, and so will we. Hello, powerful people, and welcome to the Power Half Hour. This week, not live on LinkedIn because of technical difficulties, but it will be published for posterity on poweratwork.us as well as YouTube. That was a combination of LinkedIn and YouTube. YouTube and LinkedIn. We will post the recording in all three of those places so that you can enjoy it there. I am the tongue-tied Seth Harris from the Burns Center for Social Change. The Power Half Hour brings you more voices, more news, and more worker power insights in just 30 minutes. I've got an expert panel of 3 guests who I will introduce to you in just a moment. You can see them arrayed in front of you if you are a part of our video audience. The audio audience just has to wait to hear them in just a few minutes. So the panel is going to talk about the big stories and biggest developments affecting worker power over the last couple of weeks, and important work power developments that are going to arrive sometime in the near-term future. And then at the very end, we will offer our guests a truly puny little thank you gift of shameless plugs and shout-outs. They will be able to promote anyone or anything that they would like, and self-promotion is enthusiastically encouraged. And then, if you're hungry for more, stay with us for the Power Half Hour overtime. We'll take questions and comments from our live audience and respond to questions. We don't have a live audience today, so we're not going to get any questions from them. Instead, what we're going to do is take questions that were sent to us by email from our Power at Work community. But that's going to happen during overtime in about 28 minutes. Before I introduce you to the people who are going to make you smarter, a couple of items. First, audience, stay up to date with the Power Half Hour by following our LinkedIn page at Power at Work, and go to poweratwork.us and subscribe there. That way you can keep up to date on everything that we are doing. Just fill in the subscription box at Power at Work. On LinkedIn, it's very easy. Just click that you would like to follow us. Second, I would like to thank the surprisingly large number of attendees at last week's AFL-CIO Workers First AI Summit who told me that they are faithful Power Half Hour listeners. It was really gratifying. You had labor leaders and union staff and supporters of worker power from all over the country, from all industries. It was really exciting to hear. We do this show for you. We bring you these outstanding guests so that you can hear from them. So we're really excited to hear that you're enjoying the work that we are doing here. Okay, let's meet our panel from the tranquil, pastoral, peaceful offices of the Washington Post right here in our nation's capital. She's the Post labor reporter. It's Lauren Gurley. Lauren, I can hear the crickets sounding off in the background. It's so quiet and calm.
There's no one here. It's just me. Truly.
We won't get into why that's true. So that's great. Welcome back to Power at Work. So from the Rocket City of Huntsville, Alabama, he's the president of the North Alabama Area Labor Council and co-host of the Valley Labor Report. It's our friend Jacob Morrison. Welcome back, Jacob.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And from the Queen City of Cincinnati, Ohio, she's a professor of law at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, a former attorney with the National Labor Relations Board, and most importantly, my friend and co-author, it's Anne Marie Lofaso. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Seth. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Okay, topic number 1, panel. We're going to start with you, Lauren, just to give you a little heads up so you can be ready. So we're going to look over our shoulders. We're going to look in the rearview mirror, and you are going to tell us what was the most important or most interesting development or the biggest news story relating to unions, worker power and workers since, let's say, over the last couple of weeks? Lauren, what would you say?
Have been really struck to see how many healthcare strikes there have been in the first few months of 2026. I think by my count, there have been at least 8 healthcare strikes involving nurses, respiratory therapists, emergency department techs, phlebotomists, you name it, food service workers. I think the two biggest that I would call out are the 31,000 worker strike in Hawaii and California at Kaiser Permanente in January and February, as well as the 15,000 nurses strike in New York City that wrapped up in February. It was 41 days long, and I believe it was the largest nurses strike in New York City history. Um, the strikes, ended up getting big wins for workers in New York City. I think they won about 12% wage increases over 3 years. The new safe staffing standards, protections against workplace violence. There have been a series of sort of incidents in hospitals in New York City that have, terrified nurses. The first ever contract safeguards against AI. At Kaiser, workers won 21.5% across the board wage increases. I think this is one rare sector, healthcare, that is, where workers have a lot of leverage right now, despite a pretty weak labor market. The hiring rate, we just got news today in the United States from the Labor Department, is the lowest it's been since April 2020. So it's extremely hard to find a job right now, which means workers don't have a ton of leverage in the labor market to demand more. But that is not true in healthcare. Over the past year, healthcare has basically buoyed the entire labor market. I think if you erased all the healthcare job gains over the past year, you would have the US economy would have lost more than 500,000 jobs. So that is a huge story. And the reason why healthcare is sort of not susceptible to the same sort of uncertainty that is causing other employers to pull back is that there's just so much demand from an aging population. There's more access to certain types of healthcare. So older Americans and people are going to demanding more and more health services, including nursing homes and other types of elder care. So that's a big story to me, and I don't necessarily, even if the economy continues, labor market continues to soften, I don't necessarily see that leverage that workers have in healthcare going away. It's one of the few sectors where you still see people negotiating for giant, sign-on bonuses.
Yeah, that's a great story. And in just a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit more about those hiring numbers that you just referenced that came out just a couple of hours ago. Jacob, looking backwards, what's the biggest story of the last few weeks for workers, worker power, and unions?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, the largest manufacturing employer in Mississippi, along with its unions, announced that the members had ratified a new collective bargaining agreement that is at the shipbuilding yard in Pascagoula. 11,000 workers ratified a new collective bargaining agreement that immediately institutes an 18% raise day one. And then over the next 5 years, depending on the job classification, the workers will be getting between a 35% and a 47% raise between now and 2031. Just huge increases. For folks who were, it's not like they were exactly, especially for some of the more skilled trades positions, not exactly in the poorhouse to begin with. So really exciting news out of Mississippi. And because, the unions have so far not shared a whole lot about the campaign or anything, I'm hoping to talking to some of the unions about getting them on the program to talk a little bit about what led up to that. So that's kind of I don't have much else to say about it other than hell yeah. And so I do have another story that I'll share with similar quickness. Folks have everybody that's listening to this is going to be familiar with the closing of the Bossk plant in Kentucky, where Ford and Blue Oval SK were going to be building car batteries. So they're closing that plant now, eliminated 1,600 jobs, and they're moving that production facility to EV or to grid batteries instead of EV batteries. And they're trying to use this shift to bust the union. Folks are going to have to reapply for jobs. They're not going to, if you worked at Bossk before, you're not going to automatically get the job at the new facility, even though it's at the same plant. And they're using that argument at the NLRB to say this is a totally new thing. And so the UAW should not represent workers here, even though the workers had previously voted to organize with the UAW. So that is something that the UAW is going to be having to fight a lot. And the broader lack of political ramifications, the New York Times did an interesting piece about how the killing of clean energy jobs has not hurt Trump, because people in the areas are not really blaming Trump in the same way that they didn't really give Biden credit for the creation of the jobs in the first place. There was a study that was done about a month ago that kind of demonstrated this effect, through scientific studies and stuff, and it's really frustrating for those of us who believe in climate change but also believe that it's important that the transition to a more green economy be just. And I think that it's an opportunity for Democrats and progressives to take a lesson from the New Deal, because if you look at the industrial policy of the New Deal, you look at the TVA, the government was much more directly involved in industrial policy, whereas Biden's industrial policy was much more kind of a Rube Goldberg machine, where the president just did not get much credit. And so to create a really broad-based industrial policy that has the support of supermajorities of the working class, you've got to make it much more evident where the money is coming from, why the jobs are being created, and who is going to benefit, namely workers.
I love that. I love both of those stories. Anne, tell us about the biggest worker power story of the last couple of weeks.
Okay, this is a story that you're not going to love. Okay, it's the story of Florida. All right, so Florida just...
I already don't like it. I already don't like the story.
So Florida just passed a law that is a comprehensive rewrite of its public sector labor law, and it amends more than a dozen statutes. It touches on nearly every aspect of union registration, renewal, certification, decertification, elections, employer access, and PERC procedures, PERC being the Public Employee Relations Commission, which is the NLRB analog in the state, and it weakens workers' voice. So just to give you an idea of how it's disempowered workers, in addition to changing PERC procedures to make things faster, which you'll see why that doesn't necessarily help workers, it has new membership authorization requirements, where a public employer may not engage in dues collections for a union. Their forms have to be very specific. And so it tightens control over dues authorizations and makes it easier for employees to withdraw as well. Then there's a major overhaul of union registration and renewal. You have to register annually with the registration fee. If there's any deficiencies, you have 30 days to make corrections, or the application will be dismissed and you will be non-compliant. You have to pay an annual registration fee. If it's the deficiencies are not corrected, then not only will you be deficient, but you can be decertified. And it creates a two-tier system because it exempts some safety unions like police and fire. So they're okay to be unionized, but not others like teachers. So it's really having the working class people fight against each other. They have new certification and recertification rules, making it easier to decertify. And listen to this hypocrisy. PERC has to conduct elections using in-person, electronic, and mail ballots. But if either side wants mail ballots, it has to use mail. So with prepaid return envelopes. And it will increase the frequency of elections and raises the administrative burden on unions. I told you already about the expanded decertification mechanisms, has revised impasse procedures that accelerate impasse resolution, but which might be good, right? But it gives employers more procedural leverage over that. And it expands the definition of financial urgency, which makes it easier for employers to reopen contracts and impose changes. Because as we know, you can, if there is a financial exigency, of course, we have to allow the government to make changes. But if you just make it any little thing, then it will allow for unilateral change, or at least reopening the contract and make it more easy, readable for the employer to change those. Oh, and it's not over. The public employers must now, during a specified period, allow access to its facilities for anti-union and union speech. So it's giving access to this, which is great. You would think this is great, but it seems that the motive behind it is not great, because it is allowing the anti-union speech, which isn't always, they already have that with the employer's voice. And it increases penalties for any violations. So this is effective as soon as DeSantis signs it. It will be effective July 1st, and it has some major impacts on workers. I think the main impact I'm worried about is that unions are really democratic microcosms of the country, and they're a place where people can learn democracy. So we're once again taking away democracy in this era where democracy seems to be in danger.
Yeah, I thank you for raising that one up. Our friend McKenna Schuler in Orlando has been writing about this very, very extensively. It is part of DeSantis's effort to destroy almost all of the public employee unions, particularly the teachers' unions. And it actually is very similar, it seems, although I haven't done a comparison, but it sounds quite similar to what was done in Iowa, an effort to really undermine public employee unions in Iowa. Now, the unions were very successful in organizing, and they kept a sizable share of what they had, but they weren't able to keep everybody. And there's already been a very effective effort in Florida to destroy all the unions, all the public employee unions there. Okay, I'm going to jump in with one item of my own. I usually don't, but just a couple of hours ago, as Lauren and I were talking about a little while ago, the Bureau of Labor Statistics put out its February job openings and labor turnover survey, and it had a bunch of really, really, really bad news in it. Lauren already flagged one piece of that, and that is that hiring declined from January to February by 498,000 jobs. That is, as Lauren said, the lowest level since the first month of the COVID-19 pandemic recession. Workers' willingness to quit their jobs has long been viewed as a really good sort of on-the-ground indicator of whether workers think the labor market is going well, meaning they could quit their job and find another better job, maybe bumping up their wages in the process. So quits are a really important indicator. In that same study, in February, quits fell below 3 million for the first time since February 2021, 1 year into, 11 months into the COVID-19 pandemic recession, when people were being laid off. They weren't quitting their jobs because there were no jobs to be had. And so again, an indication of how poor things are going. Let me say, these terrible data are entirely consistent with BLS's monthly jobs report. For February, we saw a loss of 92,000 jobs on top of a loss of 17,000 jobs in December and a gain of only 126,000 jobs, essentially zero job growth over the last 3 months. Now, the good news is that we're not seeing substantial increases in layoffs, but for workers who want to find either a new job or their first job, think college graduates, think high school graduates, think people coming out of apprenticeship programs, think people who are coming back into the labor force, think about the long-term unemployed. There just are not enough job opportunities available to them. There's lots of job listings, but employers are not hiring for those jobs. And let me just say, for those of you who are saying, well, Seth, we're at war. Oh, things happen during war. No, no, no. This is data from February. The war was started by the United States and Israel on February 28th. Gas prices didn't start to jump until the beginning of March. It happened right away, but you can't say it was explains these numbers at all. The economy was in fairly serious trouble, at least the labor market was in fairly serious trouble even before the war started. And now, with $4 a gallon gas and people really struggling to be able to pay their grocery bills as well as their rent and their electric bills, boy, oh boy, the economy is beginning to look fairly seriously problematic. So, and I made your bad story even worse. How about that? Look at what I did. Okay, let's turn to topic number 2. Guests, get out your crystal balls. We're going to look into the future. We're not looking to 2098. We're looking the next few weeks, next few months, next few years. And we're looking for what will be the most important story or development or innovation or event affecting workers, worker power, and unions during that in that near-term future. Jacob, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so the Knox County mayoral race is going to be taking place in August, and the Democratic nominee is Bo Hawk. He is the president of the Knoxville Oak Ridge Central Labor Council, a representative for the Knoxville Building Trades Council, a Teamster, and an iron worker. So he's got a lot of a lot of union cred. The unions have already endorsed him. That is the mayor. That is where Kane was mayor for 2 terms, term limited out, Glenn Jacobs. It's been Republican for a long time, but Glenn Jacobs only won the last election by 10 points. The national electorate has shifted towards the Democrats in 2026 over these special elections by at least 7. And a similar candidate in Texas, everybody will, I'm sure, know, Taylor Remmett won a Senate district pushing the vote towards him away from the Republican by 31 points between his election and Trump's last year. So I think that Bo Hawk has a really good chance to win. And once in office, there was a new study from the Center for Working Class Politics that demonstrated the value of having union members in office. And they talked about, they demonstrated how union members in office, even over and above progressive non-union members, are just much more active and interested in pursuing interests of working class people and building power for unions and the labor movement. And so I'm really excited about his race. I think he's going to win, and I'm really excited, not just because he's a personal friend of mine, but I think it'll be good for the labor movement in the South.
Yeah, I love that story because it's part of a larger series of stories that we are seeing around the country of working class and particularly union member and union leader candidates for elective office, and they are being successful. In addition to Taylor in Texas, we just saw an IBEW member elected to the state Senate. In Florida, in a Republican district, there was a great New York Times story about a member of the Association of Flight Attendants who is now a state representative and running for Congress while still working as a flight attendant. Wow, it was an amazing story for that reason alone. And we're seeing that all around the country. Union members are running for office with the support of their unions and their local labor movements. This is an extremely important development, I think, for the Democratic Party and for the labor movement. This idea of relying on friendly politicians to do the right thing when push comes to shove, I think that's been put by the wayside, and now working people want a working class representative in the room. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Dan Osborne, a union leader running for Senate in Nebraska. It'll be interesting to see what happens with a bunch of these other elections. My hope is that the story of 2026 will be that the Labor Caucus, which is in the U.S. House of Representatives and has about 125 members in it, will grow with actual union members, not just a few union members, but a bunch of new union members joining in. All right, Ann, look to the future. Tell us what's coming down the pike.
Just one comment. Yeah, the United States has never really had a Labor Party, and I think this is really, just piggybacking on what you and Jacob said. I think this is really excellent development. In terms of my crystal ball, in addition to the NLRB going to be overturning precedent like CMAX and which already has some negative precedent in the Sixth Circuit, and narrowing protected concerted activity and handbooks, and which will, I think, more employer-friendly handbook language will be allowed, and the joint employer rules. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to be happening with the newly constituted board, and there's only 3 members right now, and there will be more, and they will undoubtedly be Republicans. Although an interesting twist would be if somehow miraculously the Supreme Court does not strike down the Humphrey's executor, and that somehow the Democrat gets back on. But that is absolutely not going to happen. So that's my crystal ball on that. But also, I wanted to talk just briefly about AI, since you've already spoken about it, and we might end up speaking about it some more later, which is this is just amazing what's going on. And finally, it's really on the table. And I think I just want to give an example from the music industry that's already been, for a few years now, been bargaining this, but it's really making strides, is that AI is disrupting the music industry. And you can see that by mass generation of music and the lower production costs. But this is always the story, right? Whenever you have a technology, it's going to displace workers. The key, though, is how do you adapt? And I think unions are going to have to adapt to this and figure out, like, for example, and this comes from the music industry, that you really need a skilled worker, not like some kid, to use AI in order to generate some of this music that helps. Also, people want live music. They don't want AI generated music in the orchestra. They want in the orchestra pit real people when they see a live play. And so I think, so for theater, the theater's musicians have been talking a lot about this. I think we're going to see a lot of these, more and more of these in collective bargaining. But I do think we should take it as an opportunity rather than looking at all the negative, because there is negative, which is replacement, and see, well, how can we keep some of our jobs? How can we show that the human element is still important? And how can we transition to other jobs that can be unionized?
Yeah, that is some of the big issues around AI, no question about it. And AFL-CIO just had a terrific conference that addressed a lot of that stuff. Lauren, you missed out on people praising the Power Half Hour. That's not from the stage. They weren't doing that from the stage. All right, Lauren, tell us what's in our future.
I was going to say something that you had said, but I'll just briefly touch on it. I'm pretty concerned that right now the economy is creating so few jobs that, if employers pull back more because of the uncertainty around the war, that we could sort of tip over into this space where layoffs actually do begin to go up, which people have been predicting for a while now, and it hasn't happened over the past few years. But I think we're in this place where there's so many different factors that are causing employers to be cautious, whether that's immigration or tariffs. The war really adds another factor that I think, I don't know how much room we have to. We're creating very few jobs every month, that I could see things going pretty badly for the labor market, depending on how this plays out. Historically, wars have had very differing impacts on labor. Sometimes they draw people in and make the labor market a lot tighter. But for now, I'm pretty concerned. The other thing I wanted to mention is, because I've been covering immigration a fair amount recently, is, the Trump administration has been trying to end temporary protections for some almost 400,000 Haitians. And the Supreme Court is supposed to take up that issue, I think, in a few months. These are, people who fled Haiti during the earthquake and various other humanitarian humanitarian disasters. People have been here for many years, many people working in, school bus drivers, nursing homes, lots of different parts of the economy. And a group of Democrats issued or got a rare bipartisan, it seems like they're going to have a vote on a discharge petition to protect TPS for Haitians. And I think that vote is going to take place in a couple of weeks. And so that would restore TPS for Haitians for another 3 years, I believe. So that's something that I guess Trump could veto it, but it would override the Supreme Court's decision if Trump doesn't veto it and it goes through. So I think that will impact a lot of people, a lot of workers. It's a big issue that I'm watching.
Yeah, the TPS issues have been really extraordinary. And TPS workers and their allies, particularly in the labor movement, are fighting back and fighting back fairly effectively. They're not always winning at the Supreme Court, but they are winning in the lower courts, and they are turning it into a big political issue because almost all TPS workers, the overwhelming majority of TPS workers, are workers. They're working people, and they're contributing to our economy, and their employers are unhappy that they're going to have to leave the country if we end their temporary protected status. Okay, we've arrived at our most popular and third and final segment, and that is shameless plugs and shout-outs. Each guest will get about a minute, because we're already running long, to plug or shout out anything or anyone they would like. Ann Lofaso, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
I'm ready. Okay, my book just came out. It is Mastering Labor Law. It came out about a week ago, and it is about the price of 5 cups of coffee, because coffee is more than $5 now. So I think that is being inexpensive or expensive. And it comes with, if you see me, I will autograph it. I promise. Okay.
Wow.
Yep.
So people have to travel to Cincinnati to actually get an autograph.
If I happen to get invited to your school or to somewhere, I will.
There we go. Okay, wait. I don't want to let you get away with just saying my book just came out. Who are your co-authors on the book?
There are hardworking co-authors, and that is Joe Slater and Jeff Hirsch. Jeff Hirsch is at UNC. Joe Slater is at Toledo, and they are wonderful, amazing co-authors. And the only thing that would have made it perfect, Seth, is if you had also joined us on this.
Oh no, I'm done with writing textbooks and casebooks. But let me say, shout out to Joe and Jeff for a terrific book. I've worked with them both on different projects, and they're terrific. Okay, Jacob Morrison, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
Huntsville Hospital in Huntsville is acquiring its only competition. And so there's a lot of concern from the community about that. The Labor Council has been a leader, voicing those concerns. And we just came out with a report this morning, condensing all of the community backlash into one report where we detail all of the concerns that we've seen, both online and at a listening session that we hosted with a community organization a couple of weeks ago. The hope is that we will be able to continue to pressure Huntsville Hospital to come to the table and negotiate a community benefits agreement with the Labor Council and our community partners.
And where can our viewers find that report?
The North Alabama Area Labor Council's Facebook page has a link to the PDF.
Excellent. Lauren Gurley, what's your shameless plug or shout out?
I have been covering labor for the past 6 or 7 years, and I'm slightly pivoting to focus on labor and immigration. So I'm going to be diving into a lot of different industries, the underground economy, the informal economy, and sort of looking a lot more at how the Trump administration's immigration policies are impacting immigrant workers. And I think, it's a tough space because it's hard to get people to share these stories. Talking to workers is always hard because they always risk losing their job or being retaliated against, but it's doubly hard when someone is facing the risk of deportation or being put into detention. So, I'm thinking a lot about the right ways to be covering these stories. And I would appreciate anyone reaching out to me if they, hear about stories that aren't getting covered, because we know there's so much going on that people are really afraid to talk about, including labor exploitation, exploitation of guest worker programs, and various other things that happen when people don't have rights or protections at work because of their legal status.
Yeah, absolutely. Immigration is a labor story. And Lauren, if people wanted to suggest a story to you or participate in a story you're working on, how would they reach out to you?
They can go to my Twitter or Blue Sky account where I have my Signal handle, and that's the best way to get in touch with me. It's completely protected.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, audience, stick with us if you can. We're going to transition to Power Half Hour Overtime in just a minute for Jacob Morrison, Lauren Gurley, and Lofaso, and our producer, Ayush Kanvolkar, who was dealing with all kinds of technical craziness before we got started. Thank you for joining the Power Half Hour. Stick around for overtime, but for right now, class is dismissed. Okay, everybody, take a breath, take a sip of water or tea or whatever you have, coffee, I don't know, 5 hour energy drink, if that's what you prefer, whatever you'd like, bourbon. I don't know. It's been a rough week. And we're going to go to the question. Now, we don't have a live audience, so we're not going to get any live audience questions, but we did get some emails in from our Power at Work community, and I'm just going to read those questions. Anybody can jump in that would like to do that. Let's start with this one, and I think you're going to feel the pain with this one. This is from somebody in the community. I was totally astonished and heartbroken by the New York Times revelations about Cesar Chavez. I remember my family proudly boycotting grapes in the 1970s. How have we been lifting up a rapist? How have we been lifting up a rapist and child abuser as a labor icon? What does this say about the state of labor in America? Anybody want to jump in on Cesar Chavez?
I've been thinking a lot about this actually, and obviously I'm disappointed is not even the right word for this. But I also think it's important that this is why we shouldn't make people into ideals. George Washington was a slave owner, so was Thomas Jefferson. Martin Luther King cheated on his wife. A lot of the women's movement excluded Black women originally. Some of that it did anyway, not all of it. A lot of the civil rights movement wanted to exclude women. There's so many hypocrisies that go on, and this is particularly egregious because it's criminal activity. That doesn't take away from the good that he did, but it does take away from, it tarnishes him as it should. And this is why we can't just make people into these platonic ideals. They're not. They're humans, and they're deeply flawed. And oftentimes, unfortunately, great leaders are even more deeply flawed because they are attention seekers, and that's some of why they're able to lead. And that can often lead to some of this incredibly disgusting behavior. So this is just something I've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah. Jacob or Lauren, you want to jump in on Cesar?
I definitely echo Anne's comments, and as far as the danger of putting one person up on a pedestal, and how much that can do to people. I grew up very religious, and so there's a lot of people talk about when a religious pastor or somebody strays away, how people who were brought to the faith because of this person might have their faith shaken, and the response was always that you should not be having a faith because of a person. A person can lead you somewhere, but you need to be there for the reasons of the faith. And the same thing is true for the labor movement. Maybe Cesar Chavez brought you to the labor movement and to the realization of the importance of building worker power and solidarity and everything like that. But you need to be there and stay there and be rooted there because of those principles, rather than Chavez. So whatever happens to him or about him or his legacy, is not relevant as to whether or not you are able to remain rooted in the conviction that the labor movement is important, and that working people deserve more power and more say. And I also think that, people who have been in the labor movement for a long time and who have been following the UFW, the extent of these things are super shocking, but the fact that there was something happening is not that shocking, because there have been other stories about the sort of cultish way that he ran the union and the lack of democracy and the way that people were purged out who disagreed with him. And I think that also, illustrates the importance of what I see as a really bedrock union principle, which is the principle of democracy. I don't think that it's I don't think that it's like exactly a coincidence that you don't see scandals like this in the UE, right? A very, very democratic union. And we did in the UFW and in other unions, not to this extent necessarily, but, the UAW, we saw a lot of corruption there, previously. And a lot of that, I think, can be tied back to the fact that there was a really lack of internal democracy. And I think that having that internal democracy and accountability to the members can protect, not wholly, but can protect against some of these abuses by leaders.
Yeah, it's an extremely important point. The role of democracy in the labor movement critical to guarding against these kinds of abuses. Lauren, I'll give you a chance. If you don't want to grab it, we can go on to the next question.
I mean, just briefly, I guess this shows me that the progressive or left or labor movement, still has a serious problem with, having women in particular silenced in order to protect the reputation of their abusers and the, powerful people who, may have done some great things for the labor movement, but there is still very much, and we know this is true broadly in American culture, but specifically on the left, there is this problem. If it took 30 years for this to come out, and that's devastating.
Yeah, I that is an extraordinarily important point. And the idea that Cesar and other men led the UFW by themselves, and that there were no women in leadership like Dolores Huerta, whose story in this context is extraordinarily disturbing and troubling, and how not only that he physically assaulted her, but also undermined her as she was trying to lead farm workers to a better result. I think you're exactly right. The sexism of the story, as well as the cultishness and other aspects and the criminality of the story are really disturbing. So I share that. Our community members' view, astonished and heartbroken, is a really good description of how I feel about it. Okay, question number 2, or comment number 2, is our community member speaking. I attended the AFL-CIO's Workers Summit on AI. Maybe that was one of the people who told us what a great job we're doing here, which we appreciated. The labor movement's principles seemed right to me. The AFL-CIO has a set of, I believe, 10 principles with respect to AI and workers. But the battle to protect workers from abuses and job loss is going to be gigantic. The tech is moving really fast, and the billionaires want no rules at all. So I guess that's just a comment on the AI issue. I'll just add this. Several of the presentations were deeply disturbing. Duncan Crabtree, Ireland, gave a presentation on deep fakes, which was extraordinary. And he used himself as an illustration of it, and it was really quite remarkable. But we had an Amazon worker talking about surveillance and how these algorithms are used not just to surveil workers, but to hold them accountable to the minute. And explains a lot of the abuses that happen at Amazon and other workplaces. So Anne commented on this earlier. Does anybody else want to get in on this idea that that we have principles, but man, this is going to be a gigantic, gigantic fight?
I mean, I'm extremely worried about this sort of low-level office clerical worker who I need to look at the statistics. What percentage of those workers are unionized? I mean, we know in Hollywood they're unionized, but many do not have the protection of the union, and so I don't know who is fighting for them. Um, I don't see major legislation moving forward to protect them. There are small things, but I think they're extremely vulnerable. So, that's just um
Yeah.
general.
No, I think that's perfectly right. I think that's perfectly right. And not just office workers, professional workers of varying kinds are also at risk. You talked about nurses negotiating over
Mm-hmm.
AI use. There are a lot of hospitals that are pushing for AI to take over diagnostics and take over
Right.
prescriptions and take over other aspects of their business, and without necessarily having a human in the loop. And it's all about labor savings. It's all about trying to get to labor savings. It's really pretty disturbing. Jacob, you wanted to jump in on this?
The AI question, I think is sort of different than automation in the past, but to me, automation fights have always brought up the question of ownership and control, because theoretically, at least me as a worker, particularly if I worked in a blue collar industry, I had to work with my hands and be physically moving things. I would love to be able to do my job easier or in less time, but unions have historically fought against automation, including in those types of industries, because what happens is not that workers are able to do the same job in less time with less effort and retain the same pay. It's that they have to do more. Maybe they make more, maybe they make less, but then their friends are laid off, or those jobs are not retained, and people do not come on after those people retire. And I think that the because workers do not have, by law or in contracts, seats on the board or ownership stakes in our companies, we are always playing defense against this. Whereas we could be able to, in a different world where we did have some ownership and control over these enterprises, we could, be excited about automation and say we get to work less. We can have a 4-day work week or something like that, which, I think a lot of people would love. But instead, we have to, kind of defend ourselves against the people who own the companies, using this to cut jobs and bring all of the profits from that technology to themselves rather than spreading it to the people who created the value of the company.
Yeah, a critically important point. And let me just say, this is one of the ways in which I think Liz Schuler has played an important leadership role on this issue. She is not saying, slam the door on AI, we're all Luddites, no AI, pull the plug. She's not doing that. They are putting forward progressive principles about what is required in order for AI to benefit everyone, not merely those who own it, and how workers can participate in the decision making. But there has to be a substantial public policy component here because, of course, only 1 in 10 workers in the United States has a union. So collective bargaining is by far the most effective way to address these issues. But that leaves 9 out of 10 workers out of the discussion, and they really need their governments to step up. And there are some that are doing it. Our federal government most clearly is not doing it. They want a race to profits. That's all they care about, is a race to profits. So, Anne, anything you wanted to add on this AI point since you raised it earlier?
No, other than I think we have to remain optimistic. We know the negative, and we have to do. I think I applaud the AFL for doing that, in really looking at how to I would say also look to history, because this is just a repetitive problem with technology and labor. So,
yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay, third and final question. This is actually we've had this question before, or a version of this question before. I haven't heard anything about the Starbucks negotiations in a really long time. Is anything happening, or is Starbucks simply trying to run out the clock? I don't know what it would mean for Starbucks to run out the clock. I think basically doing nothing is their preferred outcome. Anybody have any idea what's going on with the Starbucks negotiations? Because I too have not heard anything. I mean, I see the social media from Starbucks Workers United. They are trying to campaign. They have launched a boycott. They're trying to get people to delete the app. I don't know how much the consumer boycott is affecting Starbucks. Again, I'm not hearing anything about that kind of stuff. Does anybody know anything, or anybody have a sense of what's going on in that space?
There actually was an update last week. They ended their strike, but they're still calling on people to boycott. I think it sounds like you saw that. and they lowered their wage demand from $20 an hour to $17 an hour. So, as far as, probably not good news, but that is movement. And I do think it speaks to the imbalance here that, Starbucks and Starbucks workers have, because even though, the campaign is heroic and so exciting in so many ways. 10 to 12,000 unionized baristas over the course of the last, 4 years, but that's still, less than 10% of the company. And
Right.
So the amount of leverage they have over Starbucks as a whole is, not really not where it needs to be to win, I think probably to win transformative contracts. And so I think that it looks like, I don't have any internal information, but it looks like Starbucks Workers United is maybe shifting a little bit more towards protecting where they are unionized and developing a relationship with Starbucks where Starbucks is not going to be fighting every single union campaign, so that they can dig in their heels for the long haul and, build density over the next, few years to such an extent that they do have the leverage to win really transformative things.
Yeah, I think the hard question here is, why would Starbucks settle? Why would Starbucks sign a contract? Does the union have the ability to force them to sign a contract? Does the labor movement have the ability to force them to sign a contract? Because they're happier with no contract. And that is a problem not just with Starbucks. It's a problem with Amazon. It's a problem with employers all over the country who, prevent their workers from getting first contracts. Lauren, did you want to jump in on this one?
My understanding was that the union sort of dialed back its demands. Also, I think they were asking for a 5% annual raise. They went down to 4%, in order to get back to the table. I think the last time they were in mediation was over last April, so it's been a really long time. And Starbucks said it was open to negotiating. I think they offered March 30th, which was yesterday, as a date. So
Yeah.
I didn't hear that actually took place. And I know they said they were willing to meet in April. So maybe something is happening right now. I haven't heard anything. Maybe a good reason to reach out. Yeah.
Yeah, you wonder if, maybe this is a story. You wonder if the union retrenching a little bit on its demands was in response to a demand by Starbucks, or Starbucks saying some version of, if you do X, Y, and Z, we'll get back to the table and we'll bargain something with you. I obviously, I don't know that. It'll be interesting to see sort of how that develops. Okay, guests, we've kept you long enough. Thank you very much for being with us. Audience, thank you for watching this only on a recording. We're sorry we couldn't do it live today. Technical difficulties made that impossible. Thank you for joining the Power Half Hour. We will see you back on Power at Work again very soon. Are you looking for more labor radio shows and podcasts? Well, look no further. Go to the Labor Radio Podcast Network. The network connects more than 200 radio shows and podcasts. To find more great labor content, go to www.laborradionetwork.org. Power at Work is there. You should be too.